Hello everyone. It's wonderful to see you all. My name is Collette Brennan. I'm the Artistic Director and CEO of the Abbotsford Convent, a multi-art form venue in Melbourne, Australia. I'm also a member of the ISPA board. It's my pleasure to be the moderator of this session, The Road Not Taken, Sustainable Touring. In this session, we have 4 truly wonderful arts leaders who will share their focused presentations with their take on sustainability and touring. The perspectives are broad, focused on everything from how we can sustain good practices as they relate to actions around artist care, through to managing our impact on the environment. And in essence, the presentations are about hope, how we can introduce new perspectives and approaches that can move us forward positively over time. This is not about a quick burn. It's about change that can be maintained. At the end of each presentation, there's the opportunity for all of you to ask questions of the speakers to dive into their work in a little more detail. So the stands are up there and on the second floor. If you could queue nicely, that would be great, and I'll call out to you. But let's kick it off with our first inspired speaker, Ross Manson, the Artistic Director of Volcano, based out of Toronto in Canada. Ross is going to offer some provocations about care and equity and some much needed practical approaches to achieving this. So please join with me in welcoming Ross.
Thanks, Collette. Hi, everybody. I'm Ross. I'm from Toronto. I'm going to start with a really tiny story. Imagine that you are standing in a forest. The sky is blue. The trees are tall. The air is fresh. It's beautiful. But then you realize that something's off. It was actually really easy to get to this spot. There was no undergrowth to trip on, no rotting logs, no slippery mushrooms, no biting insects, actually not any insects at all. And then you realize that this forest is not natural. It is a grid, planted on exhausted land by humans. Now that's a little story I've borrowed from a scientist named Robin Wall Kimmerer, author of Braiding Sweetgrass. She's a Potawatomi First Nation botanist who combines Western science with indigenous knowledge in her practice. And she describes going into these corporate forests with little bundles of wild leek seedlings, which she guerrilla plants in the forest to encourage biodiversity. Because in nature, biodiversity is another word for health. Diversity is health. And really, I see it as my job as an artist to go into forests, our neighborhoods, our cities, our countries, and plant seedlings. Ideas, awareness, stories. Stories that connect, stories that diversify, stories that are complex. Stories to make our forests healthy. Now, I love this picture. My company, Volcano, is a very small part of this guerrilla seedling planting. There's only 3 of us. Usually there's 4, but we've just begun to search for a new managing director. See me after, if you're interested. I'm serious. But what I'm here to talk about is ethical touring. Volcano, my company, is mandated to transcend borders of all kinds, and that means that we collaborate a lot, and we tour. Our projects are now taking us from the Arctic to, I think we're behind a few slides. Maybe, oh well. We're going from the Arctic, there we are, to East Africa, and to many points in between. So there's an East Africa slide, yes, that's Kigali, and then many points in between is this, next one, Boston. Yeah, thank you. Now, we wanted to find a way to ensure that all of this touring, which is comprised predominantly of racialized artists, would be safe when going into majority white spaces. And we wanted to make the safety somehow contractual. We wanted tools. Now, our starting point was a document that was written here in the United States, the We See You White American Theater Manifesto. Many of you will know it. It is a magnificently created and detailed guide for how to rebuild an inequitable system. This document was our inspiration in the creation of two different contractual tools. That's what I'm going to talk about. Number one, a standard of care tour rider to ensure a baseline of care from a presenter for a racialized touring company and also the racialized audience that comes to see them. And two, an asymmetrical co-production agreement for collaborations between the Global North and the Global South. Now I'll start with number two. That's me with Kiki Kateze in Kigali, Rwanda. Kiki is the founding director of the Women Cultural Center in Huye and the founder of the spectacular Women Drummers of Rwanda. She and I have been working together for about a decade, and over the past few years, we've created a show called The Book of Life. This was developed in Rwanda, prototyped in Toronto, premiered in Edinburgh, thank you Canadian Stage, thank you EIF, and just this fall it toured to 6 cities in the United States, and many of those presenters are here too, so thank you. But while putting this last tour together, Kiki asked me what I was going on about when I kept using the term producer and associate producer to describe our relationship, because from her point of view, she was clearly a co-producer, and from my point of view, Volcano had clearly put in more than half the money, and then I realized, oh God, I've internalized capitalism. I was, by default, defining co-production purely in monetary terms, 50-50. If you're a co-producer, you've put in half the cash. And of course, this ethically gets very wonky very quickly when the playing field is not level, and the playing field is not level. Rwandan artists, as is true in many countries in the Global South, simply do not have access to half the cash for a major international tour. That's a systemic privilege enjoyed by companies in the Global North such as mine. Yet Kiki's point of view was to call our collaboration anything other than a co-production was just silly. The resources to build a show like this went far beyond the monetary. For example, what dollar value do you put on living through a genocide and then finding a truly healthful way to write about it? So together we made a very simple decision. Let's recognize the asymmetry. Let's recognize publicly in billing, this is what we put in our programs, and between ourselves in the contract that there is more to this artwork than money. Let's recognize also that when you tour, money is important, and let's honor both. So the agreement we came up with features 4 principles. 1, agency to protect. One company protects their voice, and the other protects their ability to cover costs. Number 2, transparency. Everybody's transparent and honest. Number 3, access. Both parties have full access to all the budgets and all the contracts. Number 4, collaborative decision-making. That's self-explanatory, and neither party proceeds without the agreement of the other. So then we laid out how the money works, who gets what, who covers shortfalls, and in this way, we redefined a co-production asymmetrically. So that's one seedling. Now to the standard of care tour rider. Our first iteration of this rider is going to go out next year with this project. Next slide, please. This rider is going to be a living document. For every tour, it will be adapted to that particular project and the potential harm that that touring company might face. This particular iteration centers on combating anti-Black racism. Scott Joplin's Treemonisha is a reimagined opera that was created, directed, conducted, choreographed, and performed by Black artists from 4 different countries. We hope that it will tour a fair bit because it did really well in its premiere in Toronto last summer. There were ecstatic reviews, endless ovations. We had 11 Broadway World nominations. We were picked by the New York Times as in their Best of 2023 list, which was extraordinary because the show didn't play in New York. This was a very pleasant surprise. And it's been seen and supported by many people sitting in this room. Yet, sadly, the need for this rider is still pressing because white supremacy is still systemic, especially in opera. So there are two sections to the rider. The first concerns the touring company and the second the audience. For the touring company, the rider asks the presenter for guarantees like anti-black racism training for venue crew and for any venue staff that comes into contact, or potentially could, with the touring company. Hair and wig professionals who know black hair. Culturally competent facilitators for talkbacks. Marketing that does not tokenize or fetishize black bodies. And generally freedom from aggression, hostility, or being labeled as difficult. The second part of the rider turns to the audience and includes things like a guarantee that bringing in black audience will be a priority for the presenter and that they understand that blackness is not monolithic. For front of house staff, sensitivity training. For front of house managers, bystander intervention training, de-escalation training. Then we also ask for a statement of audience inclusion, either in the program or spoken from the stage, or both, welcoming all kinds of audience response, i.e. no need to shush anybody. We ask for a blackout night or a black carpet night, if possible. And lastly, this is a really big one, a very specific kind of inclusive ticketing strategy. Now, that's opening night. We at Volcano want an audience to be able to perceive itself as diverse. And more than that, we want this perception of diversity to extend across all the seating sections. Now, this can involve outreach and discount codes to remove barriers for certain communities, but it must also recognize that expensive seats are traditionally occupied by white patrons, and that this is a systemic problem. Now, when we premiered the show in Toronto, we asked our venue co-presenter, Tio Live, who's here, to pilot a strategy to diversify the seating. And they came up with a really ingenious method to achieve exactly this. It worked, and they're willing to share it. See me or see Josephine Ridge, I think, who's back there afterwards. Sorry to call you out, Josephine. And basically that's it. It's pretty simple. Two little seedlings that I hope will take root in our forest. So please feel free to reach out. Feel free to improve upon this work. And I'm happy to share these documents with anybody who wants. ross@volcano.ca. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those seedlings. How did you and Kiki find each other?
Serendipity, really. So I have this thing. I'm a theater director, and when I talk to actors, I say, pay attention to accidents, because accidents are a way of communicating with you. So my company did a 3-continent, 6-country thing called the Africa Trilogy, and we were on a research trip in East Africa, and at the last minute we were diverted to Rwanda because of some election violence in Kenya. This is maybe 15 years ago. And we met a group of artists at a downtown cafe in Kigali, and Hope Zaida, who runs the Ubuntu Festival, had invited Kiki, who didn't live in Kigali, and she was like, oh God, it's Sunday, there's no buses, I have to take a taxi to another city to meet these people. God, I hope it's worth it. And so that's how I met her, and then we just totally clicked. And then I sort of facilitated her invitation to speak at a festival in Canada, and then she saw something I'd done and invited it to her festival, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
So you had symmetry in the meeting.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions? Because I'm going to keep going. I also love Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. If any of you haven't read it yet, you should. It's really beautiful. And I really love your thoughts inspired by them about the biodiversity equaling health. And I'm loving what you're trying to do of making the tacit and the unconscious actually conscious and visible. So now that you're working in this way, how has it impacted on your whole team? You know, what is the office like? How are things different?
So there's like a lot of white folks, I was blind and still am blind to a lot of things that have just been business as usual. So even though Volcano's been working with diverse projects across all kinds of racial, cultural boundaries for almost 30 years. So that's been a constant. But the staff, usually it's only 2 of us, maybe 3, especially in the beginning, is white. It's been white. So with the pandemic, with people jumping ship, there was a big opportunity to really diversify the company. And so we have associate artists. I'm basically the only white person left. And that's been really enriching, I think, to have a bunch of different points of view. And we work really closely together because we're tiny. So that's been helpful.
I think on this side, are you asking a question? Oh no, you're just standing there. You could ask a question. You know, when we start things out, we have an intention and you expect these positives. I think in particular with the asymmetrical co-production agreement, which I think it's genius, what was expected and what has been unexpected through that process?
I think the main benefit has been clarity of relationship. The thing that's so great about working with Kiki is she speaks her mind. And she calls me, like we're close enough now, there's such trust between us that she calls me on things. So that's a huge benefit. And for me also, it's this blindness thing, this idea of like, oh, co-production. I was brought up as a young theater artist thinking, you know, half-half, you gotta raise the money. It's all about money. And then I'm like, well, actually that's ridiculous. Why is it about money? There are other currencies involved. So that kind of clarity, and then that leads to a further deepening of artistic relationship. Yeah.
I was going to ask that, how does that impact on the art?
Well, yeah, it's just, it kind of gets that crap out of the way.
Yeah. And you work with sensational people like Josephine. So, I mean, if they were all like Josephine, if all presenters were like Josephine, the world would be a better place. How did the presenters cope with the asymmetrical agreement?
It almost didn't impact them.
Yeah.
Because it was just, we were please put this in the program. It was really a kind of a back-end agreement between my organization and Kiki's organization. So it was really easy.
Blindingly simple at times, isn't it, to stop being so stupid? And what about the standard of care to a writer? So many learnings. It sounds like it's at an expansive phase too, you know, where you can work with a presenter and put the challenge out of how do we give away the cheap seats to people like me and make sure the different diverse people get the great seats. So what are some experimentations that have really inspired you?
I mean, there's still a lot in the future with that particular one.
Yeah.
Every presenter I've talked to has been very excited. There feels like there's a hunger for a tool, that it's got some stuff written down in clauses, you know. And so I've been very encouraged by that response. And then in terms of like, when we did the world premiere in Toronto, TO Live and our other, Luminato was our other co-presenter, we were saying, hey, we're developing this rider, can you look at it? And we asked them to pilot this audience inclusion, diverse audience idea. And to their credit, they were totally willing to work on this. And Josephine, I forget the name of the guy in your box office that came up with this plan. Tom, right? Who's a genius. He's like one of those genius people with numbers and lists. And so basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, Josephine, but they divided the whole house into, it's about a 1,000-seat hall, into different seating chunks. They released them not all at once, and in every seating chunk, you could pay between $30-ish to $100+-ish, so that no matter where you were sitting in the house, there would be a mix of ticket price. And so that when we got to opening, the house was incredibly diverse and saw itself as diverse. And it was a big lesson. It was like, oh, that worked.
Yeah. We should all have a learning circle. Is there someone, again, am I just pointing at someone who's standing there randomly, who's near the microphone? Do you have a question? No? Okay. Yes? I'm so confused. Will you all stop standing near that microphone? It's really stressful. I think the final point that I really love about the generosity of your offer is that it is forming a different partnership with the presenters as well, that we have problems to solve together and working differently. So I really wanted to thank you for opening up those conversations with presenters. I think there's so much we can do if we work together more collegially. Have you found, though, any points of resistance that have been hard to work through as well? I can't imagine there'd be any.
Not yet, but I'm waiting for that.
Yeah.
Because it's still like, when we finally get down to the show costs how much? Like there's over 40 people on the road. Yeah. Oh, and here's the rider that goes with it. Like, I'm waiting for that point to see what happens.
Yeah.
So that's a potential like, uh-oh. And then then the other thing is like, it's a rider, it's a document. What happens on the ground? Like, what happens when the people actually meet the other people? And is it gonna go okay? And that there's not as much control over that. Hopefully it'll go fine, but.
Yeah, and I suppose long term too, how do you sustain those audiences once they've had such a brilliant time being invited in? What's the long-term view?
Yeah, well, luckily that's not my job. That's
you just keep making
security, and I have to make the work.
You've got to make the work. So if you were to offer any advice to those in the creation side of these sort of journey, how long has this taken, to frame your thinking in this way that it can become so articulated into an agreement or, some rules?
Again, it wasn't that long, but it was actually the methodology was very important,
yes.
I think. So, like a lot of people, the murder of George Floyd was what, oh God. And then the We See You manifesto had a huge impact on me. Yeah. Reading that and going, oh my God, that happens here, that happened, this happens here. Like, and the amount of labor in that document, if you haven't read it, it's available online. It was, there's no, to their credit, they have no primary authors listed. It's collaboratively created by a lot of African American and Indigenous American theater artists. And the practicality of it was staggering. And then that made me think, oh, we actually need, intention isn't enough. We need tools. We need systemic means to leverage equity, to leverage safety. And then with Volcano, we put together, we used that actually as a way to look through all of our policy work, and we rewrote all of the policy that we have at the company. And we did that collaboratively over a period of months with a team that was both staff, representatives of boards, representative of artists, and stage management and production staff that we'd worked with over the years. So it was a team that was diverse in every possible metric. And we just met, I think, once a week for about 5 months to redo all of our policy. And the standard of care came out of that process.
Well, I think so many of us care about the work you're doing, and thank you also for the offer to use the agreements. I'm sure many in the room will take you up on it. Please join with me in thanking Ross. I am really excited to introduce you to our second speaker, who is stunning. Jin Jim from the Republic of Korea. Jin's an independent producer and a researcher, and she's very passionate about global cooperation through artist-to-artist exchange. So please give Jin the warmest welcome.
Wow. Hello. 안녕하세요. 안녕하세요 is hello in Korean. Nice to meet you. My name is Jin Im. I'm an independent producer born and raised in South Korea. Thank you, Collette, for introducing me to this table. This is my second year in ISPA and as a fellow. And it's my pleasure to be here in this stage, even though I'm very, very nervous. My practices as independent producers are mostly in a multidisciplinary theater in public spaces, including urban city areas with different sort of disciplines in the theaters and dance. I do international touring and collaborations and sometimes involved in the art market and the festival for its overseas programming. Today, I will continue with my slide. Yes, it's me. Today, I will continue the conversation by the topic sustainable touring, restart from the why. I named it in this way because for me, sustainable touring was always closer to find the reason why I still need to tour and for what to be achieved. My sharing will consist of two parts. One is more about the research outcomes that I've been researching from pandemic. And the other part is more of my own interpretation, including my favorite questions and even provocation. So this is Korea. Anyone who have been to Korea before? Oh, so many. Wow. As some of you already know, living in South Korea, one thing that I have never been in my life is going beyond the borderline over the land on foot. Because as Korean Peninsula has been divided into North and South Korea, to go abroad is always meaning that I need to take a plane. It seems like we are living on an island, and for me, so for those reasons, for me, international relations are always the way of going beyond the sea and understanding the world with a wider and broader perspective, which is quite limited in our own country. As many of you can also recall quite vividly, I will start the conversation from my experiences during pandemic. I would like to put this question to all of you here. What have you thought when things were stopped during pandemic? During the pandemic, seeing a series of cancellations of international touring and commissionings and so on, what I questioned the most was actually whether I need to keep this job or not. And if it is, yeah, I kept it. So that's why. So if it is yes, what is the reason why I need to keep this job? Is there any specific reason why I do this? Perhaps it's not for the money. Yeah, it can be the money, but not for me. But yeah, why? What's the reason I need to keep this job? It brought me a shift in my practices and perspective and made me even stronger by thinking of different reasons why I still want to meet the world with new ideas and new projects. Luckily, in 2020, there was one project that helped me a lot to think about the reason why I do this. I was a part of the research project called New Connections with Jisun Park and Kyu Choi for interviewing 15 different art practitioners over the world, asking their life and their thoughts following the changes in our ecosystem during pandemic. So during this research, we were able to find that our world is shifting, pivoting, and finding a new ways of surviving, even with more considerate approaches toward the different issues and the agendas in our society. Many of our practices were embracing the tech knowledge by digitalizing the formats and using online platform not only as an alternative tool, but also as a creative approaches for the new creation. And also climate changes become even bigger concerns for many of us by witnessing the significance of the climate crisis. It then continued to raise more voices about the green mobility and the deep mobility. Due to the borderline restriction, awareness on the locality was also raised, bringing the new possibility of decentralizing what we have been focusing on for so many years. Continuing with this conversation in a new connection research project in 2020, Next Mobility project was followed. Next Mobility is a research project on a new international mobility and circulation in the post-pandemic era, started by CAM's Connection and Performing Arts Market in Seoul, Seoul Performing Arts Festival under the Korea Art Management Services. This project includes the meta research, creative lab, and also let us think of the project development by inviting artists to try this idea of next mobility more in practical way, resuming the takeaways from the researchers into the new creation. So in the first year, in 2021, over 9 researchers were dealing with the different subtopics under the theme of next mobility. Categorized into digital or online creation, digital or hybrid mobility, new audiences, gamification, and green mobility with its practices. By consolidating these detailed studies, what we were able to observe was transformation of the value chain in performing arts industry, especially into creation, producing part, and also circulation and audience and consumption part. Everything was changed during, during pandemic. I didn't really put the details in the slides. I don't think you can recognize the detail text in the slide. I didn't want to give you the analysis too detailed in the first day of ISPA. So, but I'll give you the link later on so that you can read it after this. So this research in the first year, in 2021, then led to thinking deeper on the new tools that help us go beyond the limitation of existing mobility, foreseeing the transition of the new methodology. Considering the localized context of the show by devising the process and the outcome of it through the hybrid mobility. For example, as Govin just mentioned, concept touring was one of the case that we can think of this hybrid mobility. And also this brings us to think about the deep mobility and slow touring. These are my favorite term these days. Deep mobility is more of an idea trying to make a deeper understanding and relations while we are touring. And slow touring is also similar, but it's more of an elaborating on slow approaches when we are touring. And not only being fast and efficiency when we are tour, but also thinking about the cultural context and also perhaps linking these opportunities with the different research, and also residency can be the option for doing this deep mobility or the slow touring. These are also linked to the idea of the greener mobility and the green lighter, which takes account of the possible environmental effect from the producing and its touring. And considering this, we were able to find a lot of documents and toolkits, mostly from UK, honestly, and we tried to translate it into the Korean perspective, Korean practice, more fitting into the Korean practice so that Korean artists and art practitioners also can refer it for their own creation and processes. In this research, we have referred the different cases and tools consolidating into the checklist or the series of the question that each of us can presume or review before, during, and after the production. While the first part of the research focused on the how to find the new ways to move, in 2022, the second year of the research was later focused on what should be mobilized, what do we want to move, and why, rather than simply finding out how to find a way to move, but rather thinking about the reason why and what is the topic that we really need to talk through international projects. So the keywords like sustainability by thinking of connectivities and interdependency was also dealt during the research, and reciprocities and the fairness, embracing diversity, inclusion, and equality was also dealt during the research project. One of the researchers in 2020, artist collective General Kunst, has designed the creative sovereignty in a real-time digital world by establishing a fake organization called Asia Housekeeping and Care Work Association in a Google business platform by pinning the location in a Google map. And Picket Line is the title of the series, and which is combining an installation of the protests of minorities in our society with different engagement of the performances. Their research was mainly aiming to develop ideas for the international collaboration and circulation based on the contact-free installation, workshops, and performance scores in a digital space by connecting these ideas from different countries in Asia. This was aiming for bringing different female narratives in Asian society by connecting them to online and offline exhibition and sets like guerrilla performance. Topic was all about the women's care work and mix and match about the similarities in different countries in Asia, showing the solidarity as a basic resolution. Hae-ryung Lee, artist of the group, said that throughout the next mobility research, she was able to find the vivid reason why she still needs to connect these narratives in the age of the disaster like this as we are living. This connectivity and the solidarity may show how we can cope with the challenges in our society together. And the second research project that we did in 2022, social choreography by 9 songs, was another idea suggested by the Tangerine Collective, showing us how we can explore the ecological approaches of art by caring, connection, entanglement, interdependence. Tangerine Collective decided to focus on the internationalization in South Korea, not finding international activities or the possibility out of Korea. So the thing that they choose in this way was later focusing on an immigrant community in South Korea to connect those people with the dance as a tool for their own narratives, and they are bringing this dance choreography from their own narratives into the installation performance. They identified the recovery as a key word for the international mobility, and through the workshop and the pre-production, including the score method, writing, song making of this artist collective, they created 9 songs about the dance, focused on a myriad of things that dance can produce, rather than producing the dance works. This was to explore where art should stand and where is headed for in post-pandemic era when we are thinking about the international solidarity. Here is a show called Mafiko, one of my recent involvements for the last few years. Mafiko is an acronym of Malaysia, Philippines, Korea. The story begins with the 3 countries decide to be together as one country and try to elect the president for this new country named Mafiko. So the debate is held amongst the candidates who are preparing to elect the leader of the new country, and audiences are asking questions to those candidates, and each candidate persuade their audiences by answering the question and gain logics and structure. The mechanism of the fake news is explored through the perspective of the transnationalism. It is a play about the imagined nation. I chose this one as an example because it was a long-term project by research, in-depth research, and a creative residency. So whenever we choose a different city to present the show, we needed to do a residency before the show, at least a week, so that we can understand the cultural context and the political context better to speak about it. But not only that, but also I chose this project because of this map. This map is showing the passport power length in the world. The darker part of the world is having a stronger passport power, which means that not requiring a lot of visas or entry documents for going to the different countries. The others are the whiter part of the world is lesser powerful, so that they might need more administrative processes. I was fail as a producer, inviting one of our artists to come over to Korea because of this visa regulation, which is especially on those some of the Asian countries. I didn't know that before. It's my shame, because I used to work with the European artists mostly, and it was not that difficult to make the visa document for them. But I realized that it's not the same for everyone in the world. That was the first time that I realized that, okay, there is a power dynamics in our passports, and these questions are making me to think about who is in the room. I really like this map of upside down world map, and choosing a different way of saying the direction. Like we are saying that, up in the north, down in the south. Why the north is up and the south is down? What about we are changing the direction and thinking about different ways and thinking about who is in the room? That's helping me a lot. And also, like, where do we want to reach? Like, if you're doing your own artwork, if I am doing my own artwork, where do you want to reach? Where is the audience? Where is the narrative? What is the narrative that we need to talk together with, that we need to link together? One of my friends told me that artists are the greatest supporter of the world for the arts, sponsor of the arts, because we are, art practitioners are investing a lot of resources as a human to the art industry. And maybe if we are able to choose the direction, where we want to go, what about we are choosing a different direction in different ways, so that we can also say that, this is international. Not like, okay, a smaller international group, or not like to be international. Maybe we can think about a different way. So this is my last slide. So I think in this difficult time, there are still something that we can talk together, see together, and share together. There are many reasons why those whys are making us to be sustainable, I think. Even though it may be different for everyone, from this question, I would like to keep thinking on following for my further sustainability. Maybe some of them are not practical or efficient, but why don't we think about it together? Understanding the differences, distributing or redistributing what we have, embracing the diversity, facing the urgencies, foreseeing the future together, thinking about the world not as one big planet, but as a world full of multiplicity, rehearse the coexistence, challenge what we've been knowing, and going beyond what's limit, and making decisions for our future. Thank you.
Jin, you did a great job. The other thing that is interesting about Jin, besides all of these incredible global projects that she is coordinating with her colleagues, she's also a really great artist. And I have presented her at the Abbotsford Convent, so chat to her also about her incredible work. So as a person also who kind of lives on an island down the south end, it is a different perspective, isn't it? And you have been hungry always, from a little gin to who you are now, hungry to get out into the world and very passionate about international collaboration. Why?
Yes, why? I can say this very honestly because it's fun. It's always fun to know different culture, different language, different society, and it helps me to progress myself and think about the world in a different perspective is the key that I can sustain as a producer as well. So I'm doing this for me as a producer and also doing this because it's really fun. Yeah.
I think there's room for joy and fun. Let's have more of that. I'm interested also, Jin, in the last few minutes, is the work you've been doing is incredibly complex. It's across borders, cultures, art form practices, and you are embracing a slow and sustained approach to relationship building. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it impacts on the aesthetic development of the works as well?
So my recent international projects were more of slow process-oriented productions. And I realized that one of my good friends, Australian friends, Maddie and team, they started to call me a cultural dramaturg, not a producer anymore. And I really like this term, cultural dramaturg, linking this differences in our society and bringing these languages not as a vocal language, but as a language of the culture mix into the different possibilities. And so it needs time, and I think that's my way of bringing the new ideas to be on the stage, so that I use this term as interweaving differences. I really like this term. Maybe I define myself as a producer who is interweaver or matchmaker. Yeah.
I like you're an interweaving, matchmaking, total legend. Jin, you did a really great job, and we're terrifically benefited by the work that you do, and so grateful for you for sharing it with us today. Give it up for Jin.
Thank you.
Really good work. Okay, so we're going to turn our attention to and gain inspiration from Zaida Rico, who is the technical secretary from Iphigenia in Spain. Zaida is going to share some learnings derived from the Future of Mobility of the Performing Arts report. Let's give it up for Zaida.
Thanks, Collette. Oh, okay. It's my first time here at United States, so I'm a little bit nervous. It's the first time for the program too, outside from the Ibero-American countries, so there are so many first times tonight. Come on. Un saludo muy especial a toda la delegación iberoamericana. Next November, Iphigenia will be 18 years since it was approved as a cooperation program for the performing arts at the Ibero-American Summit of Heads of State and Government celebrated in Montevideo, Uruguay in 2006. It's important to emphasize that at the program we understand the performing arts such as theater, dance, circus, living arts, and all those interdisciplines that are generated from their encounter. Iphigenia is composed by 17 member countries, as you can see at the slide. But how these countries work is by making an annual contribution of resources to constitute an economic fund. All of these contributions can form a global fund to pay together for all the maintenance. For example, the technical unity that I manage, the bank accounts, or a special support fund that we have recently approved for special emergencies in the Ibero-American countries. Then, with the remaining fund, traditionally, once a year, we open a call with 3 lines of help for the performing arts professionals from the member countries: creation in residence, co-production of shows, and programming of festivals and scenic spaces. In addition, last year we opened, for the first time in the history of the program, a new grant for Ibero-American performing arts researchers in honor of the recently deceased Cuban researcher Magali Muguercia. If you don't know about her, please, I recommend you her books about the history of Latin American theater. Motivated by the approval of our 4-year strategic plan, we create 3 permanent strategic commissions to work in this direction of the roads not taken. The first one is the Mobility Commission. We start working and realized that our data was insufficient, so we decided to promote a regional investigation about the current state of mobility in the Ibero-American member countries. Based on a participatory methodological design, we look for an organization to carry out the research, and PLAF Gestión Cultural was the Chilean-Argentine researchers who shaped it. Leila Barenboim, Valentina Torres, and Pamela Lopez, as you know, who is among in the public. Thanks, Pamela. I don't know, where are you? So, the methodological proposal was it 2 stages. First, a participatory consultation, which was conducted online. It consisted of 28 questions with 2,770 answers from different agents in the member countries. And then, at the second stage, 8 conversation groups segmented according to agent typologies with a total of 50 participants, created sociograms, a special collective mapping technique. Please, we invite you to download the document in its Spanish, Portuguese, or English version. In our second strategic commission, we work running through in a gender perspective and took 2 important paths, thinking about sustainable ways with importance of care. We approve a special measure to help family conciliation. With the Iberescena grant last year, you can use money to pay for the care of your children during your project. You can buy an extra ticket, extra plane ticket, or pay a babysitter. Even so, we will have to wait a whole year to know the real impact of this new measure. And then, for the program, the sustainability of projects must be linked to safe and decent work spaces. So, in addition to this, we have worked on a gender violence prevention guide so that each supported project have to create a specific protocol to generate a safe work space. Finally, in our third strategic commission, we are thinking about sustainability from the perspective of cultural policies. We have a mandate for the Ibero-American General Secretariat. Next year will be the Ibero-American Year of the Performing Arts. So, yes, you can. So clearly, it's not a celebration of Iberescena. It will be a celebration of the Ibero-American performing arts sector. But at the program, we feel the responsibility, and we are working on an Ibero-American committee for the performing arts with diverse representation of the sector, networks of circles, dance, theater, performing spaces, cultural management, audience, researchers. The voice of the sector must be taken into account for institutional mobility and cooperation sustainability. In this special collective mapping that we are speaking about, different working groups were formed based on their experience with mobility. Above, there are the concepts linked to the group of individuals who had not mobility processes. On the left, those who have moderate mobility. On the right, high experience. It's curious to see how words are more than concepts at this diagram. They represent an imaginary, some fears, some concerns. Notice how the word sustainability only appears in the third group, the experience one. In these working groups appear the idea too that the funds doesn't promote the sustainability of the sector, but as a public cooperation program, we have generated this tension in reflection. Before the appearance of Iberescena, mobility in Ibero-America was only for a small group of artists. Mobility as a money gap, as an ethnic gap, as a professionalization gap. But today, mobility is cultural policy in many of the member countries. And in other countries, if Iberescena did not exist, there will be no specific mobility funds. In addition, I want to share some findings of the investigation. There are more than this in the document, but I want to highlight especially 6. The first one, we talked recently about the first one. The second, civil society organization, as we see, and community art circuits emerge as relevant spaces and platforms for the consolidation of networks and exchanges. And in relation to this, reinforce how festivals and markets are a key part of mobility and therefore its sustainability. It's an important factor to observe is that agents from the Ibero-American cultural space are not actively participating in markets in English-speaking countries. So we have to work on this. The big problem of green sustainable development models in the environmental context present a differentiation model between countries in the American country and those in the European continent. I'm sure that Iphigenia will speak about this. And at least the spaces of networking are a point of conflict. For those who are more experienced in mobility, sociability processes are used as a working strategy, but for agents with less access to contact networks, sociability is perceived as an element of exclusion. To try to alleviate this, we create a tool of the Iberescena website. It's called Escena to Escen, a self-managed space with the artist where they upload their information and your own microsite is created within our website. It currently has more than 800 entries, and we know that this tool has generated meetings for the realization of new co-production in our program context. So, the research document ends with 9 recommendations, but I want to emphasize in 4 of them. If we want that the performances moves, it's essential to involve buyers and programmers in the direct visualization of the product. Reinforce knowledge transfer fields to expand spaces and instances of training, but also create instances where information can have an experiential transfer methodology. There is a dimension of work among pre-established circles with sociability dynamics that needs to be broken and diversified. None of the member countries exceeds 21% of private contributions for the development of mobility. We still need to incorporate new productive sector with us. So we can speak these days, but if you need to put in contact with the program or with me, you have my personal email, and let's talk. Yeah.
Wasn't it beautiful, one, to have Zaida here, but to hear in the research the story of friendship? You know, sometimes I think we take those things for granted, don't we? But that's so, we talk about, you know, at ISPA, we've made so many friends here. I love that your research focused on that and spoke with its heart about friendship.
Thank you, Collette.
Yeah. I'm really interested in a number of the elements of your research in Australia, and I know many other countries. We're increasingly thinking so locally. It's like a pandemic hangover. So I found it absolutely inspiring to see at this time you guys were taking on this research now, the importance of mobility. Could you explain the context of why this research now was so important?
Okay. I think its territory, its needs and special attention of this context. No? So the program knows that in Ibero-America we need to speak with our own data, with our own words, with our own complexity. When we start to work in a mobility commission, we realized that our data was insufficient. We had some reports for the member countries. We have some reports for the grant holders, but they are insufficient. For this reason, we decided to promote a regional research, a regional study, investigation about the current state of mobility in the Ibero-American member countries. It's a document with a lot of information. I recommend to read, to download it, to share it, to speak about this document. In the document you can find in our website, it goes into deep in the context and what about the agents. There are a table of each of the Veracena program member countries. An analysis based on experience, the challenge of mobility, about the resources, the cultural policies, the network, the precariousness, the accessibility, the gender.
It's fulsome.
Yeah.
I think the thing that is inspiring will be for many of us is that we can utilize this tool in our own context as advocacy for the importance of this work. And I think that many countries, as you found, the research is old, or there is no research on the importance of global exchange. So, you know, high five, sister. Yeah. If you're a dreamer, aren't you? You like to dream. So this research is going to be applied in the field. What is the biggest positive impact you would like to see it generate? Okay, this is an impact for the program, and they are another impact for the sector. Yeah. No? First, with the program, the Veracena vision
is being the reference space for the articulation of cultural policies in the Ibero-American performing arts sector. So for that, with this research, now the program have real data, and we are going to start a process of prototyping solutions with the methodology of the Citizen Innovation Laboratories. There are work tables with different types of agents to find real solutions, I hope, or not, to the challenges, but this is our way. For your way, all is possible, because with this research, if you are an agent, you can have more information about the strengths and weaknesses. If you are an organization, an institution, you can use the document to work strategically with it. If you are a research, you can delve deeper into the searches, so you can use the document as you can need to adapt of your reality.
And you, through the research, but also I think just a little bit from getting to know you, have a very open philosophy, very global orientation, very passionate about diversity of cultures and contexts. So assuming all of that, what are the benefits that emerge in this regard from the research?
There are a lot of, it's a difficult question to resume in 3
You've got 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. For me, our philosophy, it's linked to the fact that we are a cooperation program. Yes. Of a deeply diverse but unequal reality in the Ibero-American region too. So the research is effectively based on these approaches. That is why there are general data, diverse data from Ibero-American region, but then there are specific data in each country, because, for example, the reality in Portugal or in Peru is not the same. In Portugal, the participation rate in processes of mobility is the 70%, but in Peru, the reality is 35%. Right. Okay, so this is the reality of our region, of our program, and the reality for this document that puts in the paper what is the actual moment late with the pandemic still present in a lot of Ibero-American countries. There are a heart, but they are a lot of work too. So I recommend to work with Ibero-American artists to know more about Ibero-American countries and to approach with this reality, with this document, I feel will be very interesting. We can speak about this.
I want to thank you so much for taking the risk to speak in English with us and to share all of this incredible research. I think that the passion you have for global engagement is intoxicating, and I think that there is incredible data that will enrich so much of the arts sector. So Zaida, thank you to you and your team, but thank you for today's presentation.
Thank you, Collette. Thank you for...
This is our last one, everyone. So, our final speaker is sensational, Iphigenia Taxopoulou. She's based in Greece, and she is the founding member and general secretary of NY24, European Theatre Network. So when I was doing some research, I discovered from the NY24 website that the word mythos is ancient Greek for thread, referring to the myth of Ariadne's thread, marking the way out of the labyrinth. So Iphigenia will provide some threads from her book, Sustainable Theatre, Theory, Context, Practice, which covers around 3 decades of work to green the performing arts sector. Let's dig deep and give it up for Iphigenia.
Thank you, Collette, and thank you to Ross and Zaida and Jean. So, of course, I come from Greece, so kalispera, everyone, hello. I'm delighted to be with you here today. Many thanks to ISPA for this invitation, especially to David Bale and Mara Driscoll. A few words about myself. As Collette said, I'm a founding member and the general secretary of NY24, a theatre network representing some of the most prestigious national and public theatres in Europe. And I am also an associate of Julie's Bicycle, the London-based charity mobilizing climate action in the arts. I have worked in theatre for more than 30 years, and for the past 15 years, I have also worked at the intersection of culture and sustainability as a researcher, lecturer, trainer, and consultant. My book that Collette referred to, Sustainable Theatre, Theory, Context, Practice, was published last year by Bloomsbury Methuen Drama. Now, the book records how theatre and the performing arts have been and are responding to the climate crisis. It spans almost 3 decades and approaches the topic from multiple angles and through an international perspective, looking at how climate and environmental concerns have been expressed in cultural policy, arts leadership, in the greening of infrastructure and daily operations, in the practice of sustainable theatre making, touring practices, and international collaboration, in performing arts education, but also how the climate crisis influences theatre as a storyteller on stage and beyond. Now, through this overview, it became clear to me that one of the greatest challenges in regards to the ecological transformation of our sector is connected to everything involving travel, or as the generic term goes, cultural mobility. This means national or international touring, of course, but also most activities associated to cultural exchange and international collaboration, not least audience travel, which, however, is not part of our discussion today. Now, why is that? The transportation sector contributes around 25% of the energy-related CO2 that feeds global warming, and as it relies on oil for more than 90% of its energy, it is particularly hard to decarbonize. So how to reconcile this reality with the need for a culture of open borders, of collaboration, and of equal access? And what about the dangers from cultural isolationism and rising geographical inequities? Now, in response to this challenge, several initiatives have developed in the performing arts sector in the past 15 years. And I'd like to share with you a selective overview of the most interesting ones, drawing mainly on examples from Europe, which, however, I believe you will find relevant, applicable in different contexts, and which you might also find useful. Now, these examples have somehow evolved over time conceptually from those that focus on environmental impacts to those that focus on creating, co-producing, programming, and policy making, to initiatives that focus on ethical questions, that is, cultural mobility through the lens of climate justice. The first line of approach involves measuring, understanding and managing impacts from travel and developing ways of reducing them. That is more sustainable route planning, production materials and waste management, and developing green riders. As an early example, IETM already began exploring this topic in 2009 in collaboration with Arts Council Australia. Like the carbon audit summary report they produced documented the impacts resulting from the complex area of international exchange and touring, and offered a set of guidelines with broad applicability. The following year, Julie's Bicycle produced a 3-volume study, Moving Arts, Managing the Carbon Impacts of Touring for Bands, Orchestras, and Theatre, respectively. And in 2011, On the Move, the organization specializing in cultural mobility, published the Green Mobility Guide, a much more systematic approach to greener touring, organized around the different roles of all involved parties and what each one of them could do. For instance, artistic directors, touring and production managers, designers, technical staff, programmers, venue managers, and so on. Between 2010 and 2006, Kai Theater in Brussels hosted a series of international conferences with the title Slow Boat: Finding an Environmentally Responsible Future for International Touring. The conferences explored various ideas such as slowing down, relocalization, the tension between the local and the global, geographically proximate tours, longer stays, sourcing locally, dropping exclusion clauses in contracts, keeping existing works in repertoire longer, collaborating more, and possibly simply doing less. Now, in the UK, Julie's Bicycle continued to work to produce practical guidelines for more sustainable touring, this time on behalf of the Arts Council England. And Matthew Bourne's well-known dance company, New Adventures, touring extensively both across the UK and internationally, served as the test bed for this work. In 2018, New Adventures launched a pilot project under the brand name Green Adventures, with the UK tour of its very famous production of Swan Lake. This project helped develop a blueprint for greener touring practices, including a model for green riders, which was and is still available to be shared within the sector, traveling companies, but also venues and presenters. Now, the second line of approach goes beyond impacts to focus on creating, producing, programming, and policy making. Perhaps you know already that British director Katie Mitchell, a pioneer of sustainability, has given up flying with or for her work more than a decade ago. Likewise, French choreographer Jérôme Bel also announced in 2019 that he would no longer tour internationally with his company. Mitchell and Bell joined forces with the VD Theatre in Lausanne on a project initially titled No Travel and launched as Sustainable Travel ? In 2022. The project was conceived as an international experiment with the aim to explore a new model of cross-border collaboration dictated by the condition that no one involved would be traveling away from their home base. So all preparations were to take place online. International co-producers would be receiving multimedia scripts with stage directions, casting requirements, and technical specifications, which would allow all the different partners to be able to create their own version of the project, working with local artists and local creative teams. Now, the idea is being more widely tested via a collaborative EU-funded project, which is called Stages, in partnership with other theaters in Europe. But the German company Rimini Protocol also produced their own experiment of what is now referred to as franchise theater. In Conference of the Absent, one of their touring productions, a host of international speakers and experts on globalization, in other words, the production cast, never actually show up. Therefore, members of the audience, any local audience, are asked to step up in an impromptu manner and become the absentees' proxies, undertaking to deliver and defend themselves the different conference papers. In 2022, one of the pioneers of climate action in the arts, Flemish performance maker Benjamin Verdonk, launched his world tour in Antwerp. During the world tour in Antwerp, he presented miniature performances in different corners of his home city over an entire year. An exercise, he wrote, not to give in to the idea that you have to be everywhere just because you can be anywhere. Now, prior to that, Verdonk and his company had received an invitation to a festival in Minsk, in Belarus. They were determined to travel slow, which meant that they were to drive a van for 2,000 kilometers from Belgium to Belarus. And so they wrote letters to theaters and venues along the route, seeking for partners who would be wishing to also present their production for a very modest fee, so as to make the most of its trip artistically, but also environmentally. Now, the idea proved impossible due to the complicated logistics of coordinating multiple partners, and sadly, the trip to Minsk had to be cancelled altogether. But last year, a consortium of performing arts organizations in French-speaking Central Europe launched a pilot project that would have solved Verdonk's problem back then. CoProd, which stands for Coordinate Artistic Programming in the New Climate Regime. This is an online tool meant to facilitate collaboration, as it allows programmers to share and identify converging projects, and of course achieve more efficient programming and touring so as to reduce the ecological impacts of the sector. The tool offers the possibility to multiple partners to get involved by choosing their preferred time frame and geographic area. Now, back in 2010, Judith Knight wrote an article with the title, "What will international touring look like in the future?" The first question to ask ourselves, she says, is, should we be touring at all? Should we be working internationally? Is it ethical to fly our dance and theater companies backwards and forwards across the world, mostly for the benefit of Western audiences, when the effects of our flights are already felt in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in China, in Africa? A couple of years ago, Mexican artist Lázaro Gabino Rodriguez wrote a letter, an open letter, to Jérôme Bell, in which he addresses questions around climate justice to Bell and to other advocates of no travel in the arts. More and more, we all ask ourselves such questions. What about those who have not traveled enough to acquire enough symbolic and real capital? What about those who already suffer most from restrictions due to authoritarian regimes, migration issues, economic imbalances? And what about the imbalance between North-South representation? And how many already completed flight miles before one can pledge never to fly it again? And what about the young ones? Are they going to be offered the allowance to travel as much as their elders before they also have to stop flying? Now, interestingly, in recent years, all the cultural mobility programs funded by the European Union are designed with the aim to make cross-border touring and collaboration fairer, greener, and more inclusive. This means safeguarding human exchange and a culture of sharing and open borders, integrating environmental concerns with a focus on both ethical issues and greener practices, and defining cultural mobility as awareness of one's position in relation to the other. In this direction, valuable guidance has been produced recently, which you might find interesting. For example, the IEATM Guide Towards Fairer International Collaboration in the Arts, Joris Janssen's Reframing the International, or the recent unique publication, Not a Toolkit, Fair Collaboration in Cultural Relations. These and other resources offer practical guidance, but also food for thought, so as to help us reconceptualize mobility and international collaboration, proposing new ethical frameworks in times of climate crisis, and suggesting that we can strive to become greener in the ways we work, but most importantly, that we can and should reconsider the way we think about working together. Thank you very much.
That was fantastic. I feel really energized. I hope you all do too. So many great tools. You just spoilt us. I loved your theory about sustainable transition. So that's the process for us where we unlearn and relearn. What are the inspiring sustainable transitions that you're seeing out and about at the moment that are motivating you?
Well, the ecological transition, not just of our sector, but of society, needs such a radical kind of transformation that we all need to undergo a process of unlearning and relearning. Now, the truth is that the performing arts sector has been very late in engaging with sustainability. But I believe that we are now at a point where a critical mass is forming as more and more people, individuals, institutions are beginning to engage with the idea of the climate crisis and environmental sustainability. I do see a growing number of colleagues getting involved, and more importantly, I see a lot of international professional networks dedicating protocols, policies on sustainable practice, building on the experience that is there out already, which means that when you look at what exists, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, you get inspired, and so I think that is a kind of shortcut to a better world for our performing arts sector.
I'm always happy to get into let's make it a better world. Let's do that. I also, I live in the Southern Hemisphere. We're down the bottom, weird island, and a lot of the discourse, because so much leadership has come from Europe and the UK, has been, quite a Northern Hemisphere perspective, and it doesn't sometimes have the same resonance, I think, for all of us who live down south. But what I really liked about your work in particular was what you call a novel approach that actually does start to centre ideas and practices of fairness and ethics as core to action. So I was wondering if you could dig a little bit more into that for us and how that approach responds to different geographic realities globally. Just a small question.
Yeah. Good God. Well, you see, I don't see perspectives are as static values. I think perspectives change. For instance, what Ross is doing is, in a sense, enriching, if you wish, upgrading a wide Western, Northern perspective. So I prefer not to dwell too much on the polarization of North-South and so on, but rather on how we can create something that would look more like a global perspective, which embraces more perspectives than one. So that's one thing. In a sense, I think that if one embraces a global perspective, then we find a common denominator, which is justice. And climate justice has two variables in my view. One is fairness, which comes in the form of responsibility, so the degree of responsibility that each one should bear. And the other is empathy. So I see the performing arts, theater and the performing arts, as the par excellence fields where fairness and empathy can be nurtured, not only through the stories we tell, but hopefully through the way we do things.
I wish we had a lot more time, but we don't. And I think having someone like you in our sector who has not only done the work, but done the research and put together 30 years of green arts practice is a thing of beauty. I know so many of us will be gratefully receiving that work. It's a huge responsibility each of us have. So your guidance and the inspirational elements you can give all of us to help relearn, I think is such a huge benefit to all of us. So let's give it up for Iphigenia. Just before we wrap up, I just want to thank the speakers. As you know, you can see those people where it's their first time they've spoken at a global conference. It's such a feeling of vulnerability, terrifying, but they all did such a beautiful job, didn't they? So when we go to drinks tonight, please reach out to them, particularly a friend like Zaida, who it's her first trip to the States and at ISPA, so I know you'll all give them a lot of love. So I hope this session has given you some threads, some moments of inspiration, some toolkits to take back with you to your workplaces.